Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a time that is all Shabbat, Hayom that is ever Shalom, that will never, Yom Shekulo Shabbat. The golden glow of two lights escape the past, embrace tonight. Candle flicker at dusk, vaguely reveals God's gift for us.
He who will bless our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, may he bless Jenny. May he bless Michaela. May he bless John. May he bless Jay. May he bless Slade. May he bless Petey, who have come up to honor God and the Torah. May the Holy One bless them and their families and send blessing and prosperity on all the work of their hands. Baruch et Adonai HaMorag.
Baruch Adonai HaMorag.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher b'karvanu mikol ha'amim, ve'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Bless the Lord who is blessed.
Bless the Lord who is blessed forever and ever.
Blessed are you, Lord, our God, ruler of the universe, who chose us from all peoples and gave to us the Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
משפטים אשר תשים בפניה, כי לפני עבד עברי 6 שנים יעבד, אשר יעשה בכבשי קנים, אם בגפו יבוא בגפו יצא, אם בעל אישה הוא, ויצא אשתו עמו, אם אדוניו יתן לו אישה, וילדה לו בנים על בנות, האישה וילדים, וילדיה תהיה לאדוניה, והוא יצא בגפו, אם אמר ויאמר ועבד, ועבדתי את אדוני, את אשתי, ואת בני ואת עצי כבשי, ויקשו אדוניו אלוהים, ויקשו אל הדלת אור אל המזוזה, ורצה אדוניו את אזנו, ורצה ועבדו לעולם. Please be seated. And these are the judgments, This continues from the event at Sinai. This is also very important stuff. This is from the Torah. This is the Torah, I should say. And these are the judgments which you shall place before them, you being Moses. God's talking to Moses. When you buy a slave, a Hebrew slave, 6 years he will serve, but in the 7th year, he will go out. He will be free and without payment or without owing something. Free and clear. Free and clear. If he came in, or if by himself he came in. If he came in by himself, he will go out by himself. If he was a husband of a wife, being an Israeli wife or an Israelite wife, I'm sorry, he will go out with his wife with him, or his wife will go out with him. If his master, the slave master, gave to him a wife, which would be a woman from the nations of Canaan, a non-Jewish wife, if you will, and she born to him sons and daughters, the wife and the children which she bore, they will belong to the master, the slave master, and he, being the Hebrew slave, will go out alone by himself. However, if the Hebrew slave says, surely saying or clearly says, his intentions are clear, the slave or the servant is clear in his intentions, and he says, I love my master and my wife and my sons or my children. I don't want to go free. Then his master will bring him before the judges, Elohim, or possibly before God, possibly both. And then they will bring him to the door, or to the mezuzah, the doorposts. And they will pierce, so the master will pierce through his ear, probably his right ear, with a piercing instrument. And then the servant will serve his master forever. Last week, we were at Sinai and received the Ten Commandments. This week, we received the Mishpatim, or the judgments, ordinances. Notably, this text was provided, or these rules that were provided within this text, which pretty much deal with civil law. I wish Michelle was here, like tort law. These judgments were provided in order to govern the people's life. Now, this isn't a harsh thing. These things were provided, these judgments were provided in order for us, or for the people, to maintain the Sinai experience, which was a Garden of Eden-like intimacy. Once again, God was literally dwelling with his people. It's interesting that within that context, the subject matter that God brings up first here, out of all the things in the world we could talk about, real estate, Pete and I are trying to sell a house, many things, he brings up the issue of a Hebrew slave. Is this surprising to any of us? We were slaves in Egypt. This is an example of God's great concern for us, or for his people Israel. I know there are those who think that this is legalism and could be harsh. They're missing the boat. God's saying he's always going to recall that we were slaves in Egypt. Within the rules here, the guidelines, the Hebrew slave was not to be a slave forever, as we were in Egypt, basically. There was a limit to his service, 6 years. However, if he wanted to make the choice in his free will to be a slave forever, he was going to go through this process in front of the door frames of the house. Why the door frames of the house? Well, recall the whole idea, the whole, the concept that Israel was redeemed from Egypt in order to be the servants of God alone. Leviticus 25:55 states that God says, I have redeemed the sons of Israel. Actually, it just says this, I brought the sons of Israel out to be my servants. In case we didn't get it, he reminds us again, I brought them out of Egypt to be my servants. Out of Egypt to be my servants. So if we belong to God alone, we shouldn't belong to another. And that provides the background once again to this text. The door frames of the houses and the Passover imagery. Remember the blood that went on the lintel, and the door frames of the houses. Thus, that became a symbol of our freedom, of our redemption. That's enough. May God give us strength. May he give us strength. And may we recall the promises that he's already given us to keep us free from those things in this world that constantly want to enslave us. May we remain free.
Amen.
Reading from Exodus 24:7-18. And he read to the people the book he had written, the book of the covenant, containing God's directions and laws. And the people said again, we solemnly promise to obey every one of these rules. Then Moses threw the blood from the basins towards the people and said, this blood confirms and seals the covenant the Lord has made with you in giving you these laws. Then Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up into the mountain. And they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there seemed to be a pavement of brilliant sapphire stones as clear as the heavens. Yet even though the elders saw God, he did not destroy them. And they had a meal together before the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Come up to me into the mountain, and remain until I give you the laws and commandments I have written on tablets of stone, so that you can teach the people from them. So Moses and Joshua, his assistant, went up into the mountain of God. He told the elders, "Stay here and wait for us until we come back. If there are any problems while I am gone, consult with Aaron and Hur." Then Moses went up into the mountain and disappeared into the cloud at the top. And the glory of the Lord rested upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. The 7th day he called to Moses from the cloud. Those at the bottom of the mountain saw the awesome sight. The glory of the Lord on the mountaintop looked like a raging fire, and Moses disappeared into the cloud-covered mountaintop and was there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'kept. Excuse me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam Notan v'tokenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and life everlasting planted in our midst. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
As you heard, the mountain blazed with fire, with thunder, with the glory of God, as it did as we read the text from last week. And as in those days we stood at Sinai, now we also stand as well and make the same acknowledgement. These are the words that God has given to us from that mountain that smokes with fire and with the presence of God himself. Pages 98 and 99 is the Zohar Torah, the response. If you need the transliteration, you'll find that on page 95.
The Zohar Torah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Israel Avi Adonai Beyad Moshe. This is the Torah which Moses placed before the children of Israel. It is in accord with the Lord's command by the hand of Moses.
You may be seated.
Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 through 21. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, even the tent of the testimony. And that even there was upon the tabernacle, as it were, the appearance of fire until the morning. And so it was always. The cloud covered it, and the appearance of fire by night. And whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tent, then after that the children of Israel journeyed, and in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel encamped. And at the commandment of the Lord the children of Israel journeyed, and at the commandment of the Lord they encamped. As long as the cloud abode upon the tabernacle, they remained encamped. And when the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and journeyed not. And sometimes the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the commandment of the Lord, they remained encamped. And according to the commandment of the Lord, they journeyed. And sometimes the cloud was from evening until morning, and when the cloud was taken up in the morning, they journeyed. For if it continued by day and by night, when the cloud was taken up, they journeyed. And whether it was 2 days or a month or even a year, that the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, abiding thereon, the children of Israel remained encamped and journeyed not. And when it was taken up, they journeyed. At the commandment of the Lord they encamped, and the commandment of the Lord they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord, at the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses.
The experience that our ancestors shared in the wilderness when they received the words from God absolutely transformed them. Those words are intended to be transformative as well in our lives. That's why we respond with "It's time," pages 96 and 97, and we say, "Renew our days as of old."
It's time he Lamarcus in Kimba Letokeha Meusha Terakeha Darkenam Lekonativoteha Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Bein Shuva Kadesh Aminu Kadesh Aminu Kekedem Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Bein Shuva Kadesh Aminu Kadesh Aminu Kekedem. A tree of life it is to those who take hold of it, and happy are those who support it. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Turn us, Lord, to you, and let us return, renewing our days as old.
As we stand, we turn to Uthnacho Yomar, pages 98 and 99. We're reminded that as our God has come to us, so then we can come before him, which is exactly what we do now as renewed people. Pages 98 and 99.
When the ark rested, Moses would say, "Return, O Lord, to the myriads of Israel's families. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. Clothe your priests with righteousness. May those who have experienced your faithful love shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, don't delay the return of your Messiah. I give you good instructions. Do not forsake my Torah."
Just quickly comment on something I observed up front. Though not the first time, we have officially entered the 21st century, the technological age. Not only are we out on YouTube, but one of the readers was reading from a Kindle.
iPad.
Oh.
Okay, close enough. Over the last several weeks, we've been considering the grand story that we are all part of, the march of God through history on our planet. As we remarked about it several weeks ago, it was a story regarding good news, and so it was called Evangelium, which simply means a really good news. It was a story with a great ending, which Tolkien described then as eucatastrophe, as you recall when we looked at it several weeks ago. In other words, a really good catastrophe that you weren't expecting. And ours is the kind of story that fairy tales and fantasy books are made up of. It has all the necessary elements of suspense, intrigue, and adventure, as well as the magical elements of surprise and wonder and amazement that even the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said were absolutely important to life. But ours is not just a fantasy story, it is actually history as well. It has taken place, and in fact continues to take place, in real space and actual time, in our space and time. The action takes place in our world. The story unfolds in our history. In other words, it is, as C.S. Lewis reminded us, and I quote, "The story is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as others, but with the tremendous difference that it really happened," end quote. It really happened. And this is a Jewish story. In fact, it's a very Jewish story. It's the Jewish rehearsing and reenacting of what we call redemption. Now remember, redemption has to do with God ransoming rescuing, recovering us as his people. A full-orbed Jewish narrative clearly sees cosmic redemption at its core. And that's why the rabbis remind us that the history we're part of is moving towards a conclusion called Gan Eden, the return to the Garden of Eden. And even our holidays reflect this. As the last of the holidays in the biblical cycle is mentioned, it's simply called Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day. Why the 8th day and no other title than this? Because it picks up with where the 7 days ended off. It brings us back to that scene at the beginning of creation. It's the story of cosmic redemption at the core. Such a story encompasses the soaring mountain peaks of creation, of revelation, of restoration. And each of these elements imply truly cosmic dimensions. And so the narrative begins, if you recall it from several weeks ago, Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. Now the great rabbi from the Middle Ages, Rashi, wondered why the Torah begins here rather than with, and I quote the text now from 2 weeks ago, Exodus 12. This month, the month of Pesach, shall be the beginning of months. Why does it not begin there, he says? And to this, another great rabbi, Nachmanides, the Ramban, answered that God's creation of the world stands at the very center of our theology, of our miraculous story. A creation out of nothing. Now, just so you understand the impact of this, in contrast, the ancient Greeks believed that from nothing comes nothing. So they posited the co-eternity of God and the universe. For them, the world had no beginning. And that's why the ancient Greek could never have really comprehended and accepted the opening verse, the opening phrase of the Torah. Now, since creation forms a foundation for the Jewish story then, and since the guiding principle of the Torah remains that God's people are to walk in all his ways, then this very first encounter with God in the Jewish narrative serves as a highly significant step in learning how we are to walk in his ways. So let me suggest that therefore, just as God stood in the middle of complete nothingness and cried, "Let there be light," so his people in the middle of the tragic voids of their own world must shine their light into the darkness around them. We must create a society of love and light. We must partner with God in what the rabbis call tikkun olam, in repairing his world and restoring his creation. But be aware, friends, this will involve strenuous effort from all of us, and it may involve serious struggle for each of us. Now, as I mentioned last week, revelation could well be, in fact, the most important human concept. And as I said last week, it is even more important perhaps than belief in God. More important than belief in God, you say? You see, if God exists but does not concern himself with the world, what difference does it make at all if he exists? If God created the universe but was too busy somewhere out there in space to be concerned about humans, if he has nothing to say, if he has no standards to set, no expectations to be met, then what possible function does this God really serve? If he is not interested in us, why should we be interested in him? Well, the Jewish story convincingly answers in the following fashion. He is interested. This is now several weeks ago, the story of the burning bush, Exodus chapter 3. He tells that to Moses, who tells it to us. And he gets involved. When Moses went back after a first unsuccessful attempt, Exodus chapter 6, God said, "I will take you out of the land of Egypt. I will bring you out of the house of bondage." Now the creation-restoration cycle later resonates and re-echoes when Yochanan HaShliach, John chapter 1 says, "Bereshit haya hadavar." In the beginning was the Word. Now this text reinforces the centrality of creation to the messianic version of the Jewish story. And the passage anticipates creation's restoration as well, as you look at the rest of John 1. But it also reintroduces, in fact, it heightens the intervening part of the narrative. In other words, the element of revelation. The Word visits the earth and radiates God's glory, just like the tabernacle, the Mishkan of old, reflected the Shekinah, the glory of God. And as then God graciously revealed the Torah to Moses, so the Word graciously reveals God to the world. In fact, incarnation, and what we mean here is God himself actually stepping personally into human history. The incarnation of the Word then, recalls the startling visitation of the God of the burning bush at Mount Sinai. When God revealed his name and his character to Moses at the bush, he repeated what he had said a couple verses earlier. Exodus 3:12, I will be with you. So he is the God, he says, who actively goes with his people. And he reminds us of that several times in the Torah narrative. Now, Rashi's understanding of the implication of these texts and of the meaning of that special name of God is very enlightening. He quotes God as saying, I will be with them in the sorrow, and I will be with them in the subjection, and in the difficulties they will face with other nations. In other words, as God said in Exodus 33:14, I will go with you. I will provide. Shalom. Or as the great Jewish philosopher Martin Buber is reputed to have said repeatedly, God says, Ich bin hier, ich bin da. Being translated, I am here, I am there, with and for you. But equally important, he is also the God who personally comes down and actively rescues his people. He told Moses this at the bush. He said, I have come down to deliver you. No wonder the Messiah who personally comes down and actually rescues his people, as our Tehillah and B'Kash Parashah portion reminded us, he can also then be called Emmanuel, God with us. He is the one. He is the one who goes with his people, as he promises. The revelation incarnation dimension then of the Messianic Jewish narrative or story climaxes with Yeshua's resurrection and ascension. And this event anticipates the resurrection then of his people, as the great rabbi says in 1 Corinthians 15, as well as the restoration of his creation, as he points out in Romans 8. He says, all of creation, the whole universe, anxiously anticipates the redemption, there's that term again, of the children of God, because it's then that their redemption occurs as well. Now, throughout the entirety of its story, the Messianic Jewish narrative and its elements then of creation, revelation which now also includes the incarnation, resurrection dimension, the elements of creation, revelation, and restoration expresses itself in cosmic dimensions. And clearly, this Messianic Jewish story, this wonderful, what is called meta-narrative, in other words, big, grand, all-encompassing story, it has a happy ending, as Tolkien appropriately pointed out. For it, and for his own stories, as I mentioned several weeks ago, he coined that term eucatastrophe. He described this as, and I quote him, the joy of the good catastrophe, the sudden, joyous turn, a miraculous grace, end quote. Now he goes on to point out, this happy ending is not a fairy tale. It's not phony or unreal, because, to quote him again, it does not deny the existence of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It does deny, he goes on to say, however, the universal final defeat, and it gives a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world, end quote. Much like our Elenu does, through which we get to take a peek at that coming wonderful age. Tolkien then goes on to describe the profound core at the center of the cosmos as he understands it. And I quote him again, "The Gospels contain a story of a larger kind, which embraces all the essence of fairy tales. They contain many marvels, and among the marvels is the greatest and most complete conceivable eucatastrophe. The story has entered history and the primary world. The birth of Jesus is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. This story begins and ends in joy," end quote. In other words, it's wonderfully good news. In other words, as he said, there is both a eucatastrophe and a euangelion, good news at the heart of the cosmos, end quote. And so we can fully recognize Yeshua the Messiah for who he really is, a cosmic redeemer. And with him, great and overflowing joy came, as Tolkien says, suddenly into the world. And we reinforce this for ourselves every day and every week through the Amidah. And the culmination is found in that portion I suggested already, our Tehillah Kabir Chadashah portion this evening. Every day, in the 14th and 15th paragraph of the Amidah, we say, "Return to Jerusalem, your city," talking about the restoration, "with mercy and dwell in the midst of it as you have proclaimed, and build it in a near time and in our day, as a building forever. The throne of David speedily establish. Baruch atah Adonai bonei Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, O Lord, builder," or technically here, restorer of Jerusalem. It goes on to say, "Speedily cause to flourish the offspring of David your servant," 15th paragraph. "Let your glory be raised up by your help. For your help we hope all day. Baruch atah Adonai matzmiach keren Yeshua. Blessed are you, O Lord, who makes flourish the horn of salvation." A couple paragraphs later it continues, "Be pleased, Lord our God, with your people Israel and with their prayer, and restore the service to your holy house. May our eyes behold your return to Zion with mercy. Baruch atah Adonai, hamakazir, shikinato litzion. Blessed are you, O Lord, who returns your presence to Zion, the one who will restore all things." So, where do we go from here in our story? Or as we're fond of saying in Yiddish, new? Or what's new? Well, we need to get our story straight so we can communicate it clearly. Not quite like our friend Sheldon. Sheldon called his neighbor Marvin one day over to demonstrate his puppy's obedience. With the tail wagging, the dog leaped to Sheldon, who pointed to the newspaper and commanded, "Fetch!" Well, the dog just sat there and whined. "You think it's easy wagging this tail day and night? Oi, that's killing me. And that dog food, that's dreck. But do you care? When was the last time you took me for a good walk?" Now at this, Marvin was amazed. "Your dog is talking." "I know," said Sheldon, very discouraged. "I'm still training him. He thought I said, kvetch." Yes, clear communication is essential. Well, the Exodus story, the story we're trying to get clear, is much like not the gospel story, but the gospels, plural, story, because you get a different view from each of the four. It, too, the Exodus story, is a story of eucatastrophe and euangelion, as we've been discovering it over the last several weeks. Euangelion, the good news, eucatastrophe, rather, the great catastrophe that comes out of nowhere to help God's people to a happy ending. The plagues, well, that was eucatastrophe for Israel, not necessarily for Egypt. The plagues, Passover, Exodus, and as we saw it last week, the Red Sea. The euangelion, the good news, God on Mount Sinai, the 10 words that come directly from him, the Mosaic covenant which operates as a ketubah, a wedding contract, the burning bush itself and what God revealed there, all that's good news. In fact, as it turns out, the Exodus story serves as a pattern and as a model for the Gospels story. It's the paradigm and the template on which the Gospels are structured. And our story for this evening, the Parsha, as well as for the coming weeks and evenings, is a significant and central part of that Exodus story. our leaders, as the text was read to you by Petey, actually go up to share a meal with God himself. And that's in preparation for next week and the following week's texts regarding God now coming down to personally live among his people, namely the story of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which begins next week. A major part of Exodus, which Nachmanides, the Ramban, specifically calls the Book of Redemption, discusses that tabernacle, the Mishkan. He explains that the liberation from Egypt was not complete with the physical departure from the land of Israel's enslavement, nor was it complete even with the giving of the 10 words, even though the revelation at Sinai was in fact the goal of the Exodus. The Exodus had not achieved its purpose, according to Ramban, until the heights that had been achieved temporarily at Sinai were made a permanent part of the life of Israel by means of the tabernacle. In fact, Ramban shows in his commentary that the tabernacle as a whole and in its many parts was in fact symbolic of the historic experience at Mount Sinai. And so, it was from the Holy Ark that God spoke to Moses, just as he had spoken to him from atop the holy mountain. Now, in this light, then, the tabernacle was intended to be the central rallying point of the nation. It was surrounded by the tribes of Israel, and it was visibly crowned by the Shekinah, by the cloud of God's actual, active presence residing among his people, as our Numbers selection reminded us. And when it did that, it was in fact first the fulfillment of the promises of the burning bush, that God would do this. In other words, it was secondly the actualizing reality of the name Hashem, the God who goes with us. And let me suggest thirdly that it was the original incarnation of the God of the universe. And so this part of our grand story also includes liberation, revelation, and incarnation, just as the larger, wonderful story we've been discovering together does. God came down and lived among his people. Remember, the Mishkan is the place to which every Jew would go, with the offerings through which he or she would interact with, relate to, and fellowship with God. Now, the function of that tabernacle in the wilderness was later carried forward, as you're well aware, by the temple in Jerusalem. And then later, throughout the long and bitter exile, our centuries-long national struggle, the centrality of God's presence has been recalled and represented in what you might call the miniature sanctuaries, such as the synagogue and what was called the study hall or the Beit Midrash. For it is in them, and in fact through them, that we as Jews recall and reenact the sounds of Sinai and the tremendous radiance of the temple. And those who join with us experience that as well. Great rabbi from the last generation, Rabbi Hirsch, sees the key to the tabernacle and its relationship to Israel's calling in next week's chapter 25, verse 8, which says, they shall make a sanctuary for me, so that I might live among them. So Hirsch points out that sanctuary represents Israel's obligation to sanctify itself in its personal response and life. It is what we're it's what we are told by the rabbis we need to be involved in, namely Kiddush Hashem, living in such a way that God and his reputation are enhanced rather than diminished. An ideal well worth considering in our day and age, which is what Deuteronomy 4 was all about. Moses says, speaking for God, if you follow these guidelines, nations of the world will look at you and say, wow, what a nation that has a God so near to them. Or to fulfill our calling in Exodus 19, as we looked at it last week, to be a holy nation in a kingdom of priests. Or as God will remind us as we get to the very center of the Torah, Leviticus 19, be holy as I, the Lord your God, am holy. when we as a people, but certainly then when the nation carries out that primary responsibility, God responds by dwelling fully and powerfully among them. And that's the reality we get to replicate with Uvnucho Yomar. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place. Or pardon me, return, O Lord, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. And in fact, a significant portion of our liturgy reflects this chapter in our story. And it reinforces our story's main theme. Our God is a God who actually and actively goes with his people on their journey, or you might even say their journeys through history. Ma tovu, the recognition of this reality by that strange prophet of old, the one who lost the debate with his donkey. Ashreish and Michamoka, the evidence of his presence, which even Pharaoh finally got the point of at the sea. And then the picture that was read for us from Numbers that pictures this whole story and journey. On the day the tabernacle was finished, the cloud covered it. And that evening, the cloud changed to the appearance of fire and stayed that way throughout the night. It was always so. The daytime cloud changing to the appearance of fire at night. When the cloud lifted, the people of Israel moved on to wherever it stopped, and they camped there. In this way, they journeyed at the command of the Lord, and they stopped where he told them to, and then remained there as long as the cloud stayed. Vayehi bin Soa, the rallying cry from the next chapter, Numbers chapter 10. Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. The rallying cry when Israel moved out, actually following God as he personally led them and actually was present in the pillar of cloud. Uvnucho Yomar, as I said, the welcoming response when Israel set up camp wherever and whenever God stopped leading them, as the Shekinah stopped moving. Now please recall that all of these texts that I've shared with you are from the book of Bamidbar, or Numbers. It's the book of journeyings, the wilderness wanderings, the story of Israel's struggle and her journey. And it may not be a story that's and it is a story that may not be a whole lot unlike the story we're actually involved in ourselves. Which leaves us with, again, that question. So where do we go from here? New? Well, we need to see that for us too, the story involves struggle and a journey. For those of you who remember, as it did for our friends Sam and Frodo in Tolkien's classic. If you don't remember, it still involved a journey for them, and it still involves a journey for us. And we need to recognize and, in fact, experience for ourselves the overarching reality of the message of the Mishkan, the meaning of the Mishkan, and of the significance of that name that we say is Hashem, the God who goes with us. We need to recognize and experience for ourselves what Yeshua promised to us. And I will go with you always, even to the end of the age and through the end of time. All we need to say is, I'm on my way, Lord. Take the next minute or so for a time of reflection and response as you consider your part in this grand story and wonderful journey that we find ourselves on. Who answers that for us, pages 102 to 107. As we rise and face the end spot of that journey, Jerusalem. And we respond in pages 102 to 107. Aleinu l'shabayach l'adon ha'kol לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית שלא עשינו כגוי הארצות ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה שלא שם כלכנו כהם וגור עלינו ככל המונם ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים
HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Sharunotei Shamayim V'yoser Haaretz, U'moshav Yikaro B'Shamayim Mima'am, Ushkiraruzo, V'gavei Meromi, Hu Eloheinu Eino, Emet Malkeinu Efesulato, Kakatuv B'Torato, Vayadata Hayom V'Hoshevatam, El Livaveka Ki Adonai, Hu HaElohim B'Shamayim Mima'al, V'al Ha'aretz Mitzakat Eino. It is incumbent upon us to praise the Master of all, to exalt the Creator of the world, for He has made us distinct from the nations and unique among the families of the earth. Our destiny is not like theirs. Our calling is our task. We bow down and acknowledge before the King of Kings that there is none like Him, for He stretched forth the heavens like a tent and established the earth. Truly there is none like our Lord and King. As the Torah says, you shall know this day and reflect in your heart that it is the Lord who is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. There is none else. We hope, O Lord our God, to soon behold your majestic glory, when all abominations shall be removed and all false gods shall be at an end. Then shall the world be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty, and all mankind shall call upon your name, for to you every knee must bow, and every tongue declare that you are God. Reign over us soon and forever. May the kingdom of David's greater Son be established forever. For then shall the words be fulfilled. The Lord shall be king forever, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord shall be one, and his name one. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai, v'melech al kol haaretz, Bayom Hahu, Yehiye Adonai Echad, Ushmo Echad. You may be seated. Very pointedly reminded us as the Torah ends virtually there, so the story began. I am the God who goes with you. Take heart. Well, also take notice of the various opportunities we have through the rest of Shabbat. If you signed up for the class, or if you have not, and you still want to somehow hop in on it, you can probably convince the teacher tomorrow to accept you. Feel free to bribe her in any way you choose. Noon to 2. Then, of course, the Torah study continues in the afternoon. Take advantage of that as well. And by all means, make the best use of this Shabbat, this weekend, and the upcoming week that you possibly can. Don't forget the special opportunities. Beacon House, the, what's it called, the Harmony Concert?
Celebrate Harmony.
Celebrate Harmony concert. That information is on the back table. Take advantage of that as well. With that being said, we now get to stand and prepare ourselves to receive the blessings that God has promised to shower on us, as He promised in days of old. So we are ready to receive what He said He wants to give to us. Yivrechecha Adonai v'yishmareka, Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, Yesa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you. May He be gracious to you. May He lift His countenance upon you to show you favor. May He in fact show you favor and cause the light of His face to shine fully on you, and grant you peace. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Hello, Shabbat.
Where have you been?